Welcome everyone to episode 38 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts and today I talked with Anna Laverty, who is a producer and engineer from Melbourne, Australia. She's also the founding member of the Music Producers and Engineers Guild of Australia. In this episode, we talked about how she was an assistant engineer for around 10 years and some of the skills she obtained during that period. We talk about the importance of listening and artist comfort in the studio. And we also discuss some of the findings of the inaugural survey conducted by the Music Producers and Engineers Guild of Australia, and also how you can join up. If you can do us a favor and share this podcast on your socials or in a conversation, that just helps us spread the word and get it out to as many people as possible. Make sure that you are following or subscribed on your podcast platform that you're checking this out on. And if you have any suggestions or any guest suggestions or any questions about the podcast, you can email us at podcast.whatsthatsound@gmail.com. The links are all in the show notes for everything that you might want to know more about, anything discussed in this episode that you want links to. It's all in the show notes. But for now, let's jump into it. Episode 38 of What's That Sound with Anna Laverty. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. Welcome everyone to another episode of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts and today I am joined by Anna Laverty. Anna, welcome to the podcast today.
Hello, Stu. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We've been trying to tee this up for a long time, but you've been overseas and now you're back.
Yep,
Tell us a little bit about what you were doing overseas and then we'll jump back into the about you, but yeah.
Yeah, I have just been spreading my wings. I had a few opportunities over in England and Scotland, and so we sort of went over and based ourselves there. And I was able to get into a few studios and work with a few clients from over there, which was really, really cool. And I also did like a production workshop at a studio in Scotland for women and non-binary producers, which was amazing.
Fantastic.
And then the last thing that I did before I came back was I participated in a UK Music Producers Guild writing camp. It was their first ever writers camp that they've organised. So I was one of the participants at that. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, nice one. Well, we'll take it back to even before you became an engineer or anything like that. Where did music come into your life?
I have just always been a huge music lover. I just nothing has ever spoken to me in my life like music does. And that was just evident from really, really early on, primary school kind of stuff where people would comment on my love of music. And then high school, I tried to do music at high school and I wasn't very good at the theory, so I didn't stick with it in year 11 and 12, but I did do I did learn guitar, so I learned Spanish flamenco guitar.
Oh, wow.
And then but I'm left-handed and no one ever flipped my guitar upside down, so I'm not that good. I gave it a go. And then in year 11 and 12 I did drama and I got so into I obviously didn't want to be an actor, but I took over the roles of audio and lighting and sound basically.
Yeah, right. Yep. Yeah. Cool. And so when you were, growing up in those formative years, what sort of music were you listening to most of the time?
Most of the time, really, really intense kind of pop music. So I had a phase in high school, like Spice Girls, and I had a phase where I loved Hanson and all that kind of stuff. But then when I was like around 14, when you actually start having real feelings and emotions about sort of more grown up things, I got two older brothers, and one of them had Nirvana Unplugged in New York, and I got so into that, and then that obviously led me to to their proper albums, and then my musical journey went from there.
Yeah, wicked. I mean, I feel like people of our age, that were into like that alternative music, there was just something about it that didn't like exist anywhere else. It was just like it was noisy. I was into punk rock. I was into like fast stuff. And there was nothing that existed that sounded anything like that. So that's really cool. Do you remember listening to any of like production based stuff, or was it all
Hugely.
Just like
Yeah. So like if you want to talk about actually where my musical love comes from, it's probably my dad's record collection, and it's the classics of that era. So I was huge Beatles fan from when I was a kid. I love the sound of like John Lennon's solo record, and really into Elton John, and I'm just trying to think of what other records he had there. There was so many that I just became obsessed with, and of course it was on vinyl. My dad's a hi-fi guy, so it always sounded good in my house, and I have very, very distinct memories of sitting there on the beanbag with headphones on, listening to these records and reading the liner notes and being like produced by, engineered by, and that's how I found out what this job even was. And so that they were my earliest like musical memories and influences. Yeah.
And do you remember like what it was about those sorts of albums or the production that was like standing out to you? What were you listening out for, that sort of thing?
It's hard to say. I think really a lot of it is the arrangement of them and the form of the songs, like the classic kind of pop songs. And I think even now when I'm producing records, I do sometimes maybe fall back on those more like traditional arrangements and stuff, because it's what's in my DNA from what I grew up listening to. But I think is it too cheesy to say the warmth? I love the warmth in those records, and I love the fact that there were mistakes in the performances and they stayed in there, and we all know them and we don't think of them as mistakes anymore because they just make the songs.
Yeah, for sure.
So all of that stuff. And honestly, like this is something that has stayed with me forever, is just the feeling in songs and performances is king. It's the most important thing,
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely something about honesty in those sorts of like records from back then, where, like you said, they're leaving mistakes in, but it's just about the feeling, the feeling of the songs speaks. Like these days, I don't know how many artists, I mean, this is a ridiculous thing to say, but generally in the pop world and the processed music and all that, there's not as much like focus as much on the feeling of songs and the feeling of music and the way that the chords come together to create a sort of a feeling. But I mean, again, it's kind of ridiculous because what do I know? I'm not in those sessions, but I feel like the emotion just
no, but we did all. Yeah, we did all just get to watch. Get Back, which was like this 9-hour epic documentary of the making of that Beatles record, and it just I was just so happy watching that because it was basically like being at work. It was like being in the studio with any other band. It just happened to be the Beatles. And so for me, it was so important to realize that they're just, obviously they're just people, but those records that mean so much to me and we all put so much weight on was just made by people like us in the room at the same time. They just happen to be a phenomenal songwriters. And so that was really, I loved watching that documentary. And it was so funny because I watched it with a few other people who were just like, oh my God, this is so boring. And I thought, wow, I'm the right person.
You don't get it. Yeah,
I'm the right person in my job. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's another one with Paul McCartney on Disney with Rick Rubin. That's awesome too, where he breaks down some of the songs. Good. It's so cool.
I actually have to say, like, I think I realized I wanted to be a producer from watching music documentaries. When I was growing up, like I'd watch them and I'd be like, I just want to do that all day. I just want to sit there and be that guy in that chair. I don't even know what it's called, but that's what I want to do.
So true. Well, talk us through like how you started to move towards that then.
Well, it was such a natural progression, and it was when I was still a child. So I was about 14 when I realized I wanted to be a producer or a sound engineer, actually, is what I always said I wanted to do. It was that drama class where I did the sound. And then I went to like a drama university, the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, and I did all the sound for like theatre shows, and we had our own radio station where we had to create adverts and do Foley and all that kind of stuff. And then we had to specialize, so we would pick which area of sound we wanted to go into, and I chose production. I was going to choose live sound because I love live music, absolutely love live music, but I went and did some work experience in live sound, and I was like, too hard, like too honestly for me there was a few things, but probably the main one was lifting stuff. I mean, at this stage, I'm like a 17, 18-year-old girl volunteering, going and doing work experience at festivals, and it was not a super supportive environment. I was like, I'm going to go and record bands in studios, which was my other love.
I can relate on another level is the more like go-getter, like you just got to do it. You just got to get into it. That's not me either. And so I can relate in on that side of things where, you know, I'm a gentler person. And, you know, there's something about the studio that's a warm environment. It's like you're like you're enabling people's creativity where it's not the same in a live environment. So that's how I can relate to what you just said.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing that really stands out for me now is the pressure of getting it right live because you don't get another go at it. It's like you just have to get it right when you're mixing a band live, you know, because it's gone. So that, I definitely chose right when I chose production, and I moved into that, and I started going and doing work experience in studios because you had to do like all this secondment as part of your uni course. So I went and did that, and I absolutely loved it. And those guys that I went and did work experience with, they turned me on to a load of other new music as well that I didn't know of because my dad wasn't into it or, you know, whatever. And then that's when I went through my like Britpop phase, you know, I was massive Oasis and Blur and Pulp and Primal Scream, all those bands.
Nice.
Yeah,
love it. And so, and then, you know, obviously that was your learning, or we're always learning, but your early learning stages. Yeah. Then how did that progress into you know, working more in the environment, I guess?
Yeah. So that was, I just started early. So I graduated from university when I was 19. And I think it was 2 weeks after my last class, I moved to London. So I had been managing bands and putting on gigs and shows around Perth at the time. And I was like, could not wait to spread my wings and get out of there. And I moved straight to London with a band that I was managing at the time. The singer is actually my husband now, but at the time he was just my boyfriend. And so we moved to London. I had $500, which I thought was loads of money. And I got there and quickly realized I had to get a job like before Friday or I would have to come home.
Yeah, wow.
And so I did. I went and got a job. I just got a job working in like a record store, which was amazing, working at Virgin Megastore in Angel Islington.
Oh, wow.
And Paul, my partner, got a job at HMV on Oxford Street, and basically that's where we met. and another person in the band, Maria, she got a job at the bookstore on Oxford Street. So we were working at these huge record stores full of people in bands.
Yeah.
And then that became our scene. We had like 300 pals, and I started a club night in Soho booking bands. And it was just packed every month because
what a way to do it. That's unreal.
Yeah. For one, I booked it like the day after payday. So every month, everyone had just been paid and they came down and we had like 4 bands play. And then from there, it was like all these amazing bands were coming and playing at my night. And I thought they were all being ignored by the music industry. So I started my own record label and I signed these bands and couldn't afford for them to record. So I was like, well, I know how to record. So I turned up in the rehearsal room, and recorded them. And then I pressed it to vinyl and then I sold it. I've lost loads of money, but it was so much fun. And I was just booking loads and loads and loads of nights, and I was doing the sound at those nights. And then after like 3 or 4 years, I was like, I really miss being in the recording studio. And so I took my floppy disk that had my CV on it and I went to the internet cafe and I sent it out to a bunch of studios in London saying, can I come and work for you? And most of them didn't write back, and a couple did write back. And one in particular that wrote back was Miloco, which is a studio group in London. And they said, we have a work experience program. It's 2 weeks. You can come in and do that. So I went down. I learnt from the work experience person who was leaving, and they taught me how to like wash tea towels and fill up sugar containers and all the rest of it. So I did that
awesome stuff that we do in recording studios.
Yeah. And then on the last day at their Leroy Street studio, I got asked if I wanted to go in the studio and help Ben Hillier, who's a producer who was packing up his studio because he was going to America to do the Depeche Mode record. So he was packing up all of his gear into road cases. So I went and did that with him. And we got on really, really well. And then so that was the second last day. And then on the last day, he said, well, I'm going to be away for 6 weeks. If I pay you £6 an hour, will you be the assistant engineer in the studio while I'm gone? And anyone who comes in, you just have to make sure they don't, break or steal anything. And that was my first job in the studio. Wow. And then when they came back from America, I just became their assistant and I worked there with them. And he shared that studio with another producer called Paul Epworth. And so I worked with those guys on the records that they were doing at the time. Yeah.
Wow, what an experience. What do you remember, like, because you would have been seeing so many things for the first time, like from professionals. Do you remember some of those early thoughts that you were having, in those sessions?
I'm such a kind of go with it sort of person that I just roll with anything that happens basically. But I do remember thinking at the time and knowing still that all the things that you learn in audio school are great and they're the foundation, but you really don't learn how to be a producer until you get in the room and either watch other people do it or do it yourself. Because so much of production and what we do, so much of it is about personal interaction and being able to sort of read the room really, really well and work out what your next moves are. So like plugging in microphones and setting them up and putting them in the right place on the snare is kind of important, but really what's more important is making sure that like everyone is happy. And if they're not happy, like that you've acknowledged that that they're not happy and you're doing everything that you can to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, the general management of time in the studio as well is like,
huge.
It's huge. And you're dealing with different personalities each time that you're in the studio. And even within a band, say there's 5 people, you could have 2 of them in the room at one time. That's completely different to the other 2 being in the room at the one time, and they work differently to the other 2. So it's like you're just constantly figuring stuff out and managing, okay, I know this person's really slow at recording, so I've got to make them speak, all that sort of stuff.
People management, absolutely. Time management, people management, and just like energy management. So knowing when to take a break and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so you're assisting, you're getting to like, even just talk us a little bit through that, and then what it looked like for you to move on to, doing it yourself.
Well, I think I was an assistant for the longest time possible. I kind of really loved the job. Yeah. I loved assisting. I love working with other people. I love learning from other people, watching how they work. I was actually a really good assistant. Like I was able to sorry, that don't mean that to come out wrong, but I was really able to know when to speak and when to shut the heck up. I knew when people needed a cup of tea, and I was pretty good at reading that. But that was such great training for now when we can't afford assistants and we have to do all of it. That was really great. And then I remember I moved back to Australia because the band had broken up, and my boyfriend was like, I want to go back to Australia. I need some sun, even though he's from Scotland. Lol. So we moved back, and I said, well, I don't want to go back to Perth because there's no jobs for me in Perth. And so we moved to Melbourne. And I remember saying, because the guys in the studio were like, we'll hold your job, see how you go. We'll hold it for a year.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Paul, if I'm not working at Sing Sing within a year, I'm coming back to London, whatever that means. Yeah. And he was like, yep, fair enough. And then I came to Melbourne, didn't know anyone, went and knocked on the door at Sing Sing and was like, can I have a job? And they said, no, we don't employ anyone. But I met Kai and I met Jude, and we, it was all, they were lovely, and they said, we'll keep you in mind if anything comes up. And then literally, I think it was within 2 weeks, they started emailing me and offering me assisting jobs, which was amazing. But I had been engineering a bit in England, so it was sort of like starting from zero again, but I did it, and this is why my journey is so long, because I just kept going back to the start, and so I came here and I got put on some sessions with Adam Rhodes, who's one of the most amazing engineers in this country, and then I got on a session with Stephen Schramm, and we have a very, very similar sense of humor, and so he just kept hiring me. Yep. And he reminded me of this recently. He said, on your 30th birthday, I said, your birthday present is I'm not hiring you anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, you need to start making your own records. You are so past capable of making your own records. And he kicked me out of the nest. Wow. And so I had been doing this since I was, I went to uni when I was 17, studios from when I was 19, and I'm 30 now. And he was like, no, you need to do your own thing. Yeah. Wow, and so that was I needed someone the confidence just wasn't there. Even though I was essentially making records and people were just sitting on the couch at the back of the room, not Stephen, but other people, I could absolutely do it. I just didn't have and I still wasn't calling myself a producer. It wasn't until I got a manager and she started calling me a producer that I was like, oh, maybe I am a producer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been a very, very long journey. It's been a very long journey.
Well, I guess at this point we can start. I might start rattling off some of the names of the amazing talents that you've worked with. We've got Amanda Palmer, we've got Stella Donnelly, Courtney Barnett, Meg Mack, Cam Cope, Paul Dempsey. Some amazing names in there. Like, just obviously world-class talents, from Australia, but, and they've been doing this for a long time. All of these, not all of these artists, but a lot of these artists have been doing it for years and years and years. So it's like, to be able to work with these sorts of people, it requires them to be able to trust you. And I know you always have to work with them for the first time each time anyway, but you've got return credits. You've been working with some of these artists for a long period of time. So, talk us through some of that I've just, gone through probably the period of 10 or so years, squashed it into.
Yeah. Well, I would say the biggest boost or the biggest confidence comes from when you get a return artist, because it means they had such a good they could go with anyone. It means they had such a good experience last time, or they trust you so much that they chose to work with you again. And that's a pretty big deal. But where do I go? Most of those people you mentioned, I think, are Australian, apart from Amanda Palmer.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So I work, I've worked with all of those amazing people, and every time, and often, I think a lot of them were women as well. I think often when you work with women, they haven't always had such a great experience in the studio before, or haven't always been heard or listened to before. And I feel like sometimes when people I'm pretty good listener. And so I think a lot of people trust that I'm listening to what they're saying and trying their ideas and all that kind of thing. So that's just in my personality to be like that. So,
sure.
I don't know.
And so, I guess we can talk about maybe what your process looks like. Is there a similar process across different projects with different artists, or do you kind of tailor it towards what that person needs?
Yeah, it's definitely tailored, but of course I have I approach everything the same way, and then depending on what happens, I go off in different directions. And when you've been doing it for a while, you're able to what those pathways are, because you've been in that situation so many times. So I guess what I would say is I probably almost always do pre-production.
Yep.
So I like to meet people, hang out, have the big conversation about the music and the songs and what instruments we've got and what tunings we've got and what gear we've got and all the rest of it, what budget we've got, the time, the dynamic between the people in the band. I like to suss all of that out before we go anywhere near a recording studio.
Yep.
And I'm able to sort of see what the dynamics between the people are and work out any issues in the band before we go near a studio. So that's probably the start. And then I just choose based on the budget and the time, the appropriate studios to record at based on what gear we need.
Sure.
And go
so
from there, basically.
Yeah, well, I guess, let's talk about maybe what good sessions look like, and then maybe what a not so good session looks like, and how you maybe address those sessions that are kind of not going the right way.
Well, a good session is when everyone's pretty prepared but really open to trying new things. It's when everyone is honestly, I think just openness is the most important thing. When you come in, you're pretty confident in what you want to do, but also if I suggest something on the fly, that you're just happy to try it and see if it works in the song or not. Also, I like to foster an environment of everyone listening to everyone else. So if a drummer has an idea, we listen to it and we try it. Because that's how people in the room feel validated and heard and feel like they're part of the thing that we're all trying to create. There's absolutely no point in saying to someone, well, you're the drummer, what do you know about backing vocals? Because they might have a very good idea of a backing vocal. particularly because they think in rhythm. So that would be an ideal person to have an idea about backing vocals, actually.
Great point. Thank you. I'm a drummer, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, well, there you go. But you just don't know where those ideas are going to come from, and they could be something that you're just not seeing at the time. And I know it's like way easier said than done, but I do try to remove the egos from the room if possible.
Yeah. Well, I think, talking about that, the openness and being able to foster the creative environment is what is like the most fun for me in the recording process, is being able to see what people might point out and just, getting the unexpected. I love those sessions where, we know what song we're doing. We've done the pre-production. We know the song layout. We know what instruments we're using, et cetera, et cetera. But it's so much fun when you just get this, hey, what if we tried that? And you just go for it for half an hour, and then it creates the coolest thing in the whole song.
That's right. Things can completely change from what you thought they were going to be. And to be honest, a lot of that stuff does happen in pre-production, so that you don't, because sometimes when you go on this whole journey and you change things up completely, and then 2 days later you're like, what the hell were we thinking? So you don't want to end up with that on tape and then you got no time. So I do try to do those things in pre-production. Yeah. But I definitely love to do them. It's very important.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so, when you've had some times in the studio where you're like, that didn't go kind of the way I hoped, what are those sorts of times, and, how do you kind of navigate them?
Usually it's a people problem. So a person problem. There's often like one person who is just not playing ball with the rest of the team, and I can guarantee that it's got nothing to do with me. It's got to do with issues that previously existed in the dynamic, and then me being there and maybe giving more attention to one person than another can exacerbate that, or people feeling not heard, or people actually just genuinely really not wanting to be there but not having the ability to say it. True, and so sort of like, I like to say they're throwing their toys out of the pram so that they get kicked out or whatever it may be. Yeah. It's like, I got little kids, so I'm aware of this kind of behavior.
It's true though. I've seen that
true.
exact thing.
I'm not, it's absolutely true. And also again, drummer, you're working with a drummer and they're playing this rhythm and you're like, something's not working with the drum. No, this is great. This is this particular rhythm and it's perfect and blah, 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 blah. It's this or that that's making the problem. No, it's definitely where the kick drum's falling. And you suggest something and they just will not try it. They will not try it. So it's almost always like a people problem where they're not happy with, because I always say, being a producer of like an album or whatever, you become the fifth member of the band or the sixth member of the band for the time that you are in the room. And some of them haven't chosen you. So say like one or two people in the band chose you to be the producer, and then there's these other people in the band that are like, I never even wanted you here. Why are you telling me how to play the drums? It's a really valid feeling. But for me, who has been asked to come into this dynamic, I can see what the problem is and I'm trying to fix it, but they aren't playing ball. And that's, for me, that's like the hardest situation to navigate because they just don't want you there. And so the way that I generally get around that is I take them to the pub or, say that we need to have like a chat, and I have to just bring them onto my side. I try to kill people with kindness to explain what I'm trying to do. And I'm not there to show them up as a bad player or whatever it is. I'm just trying to get the best out of the song. And I've been asked to be there. I'm being paid to be there. They're paying me to be there, whether they like it or not. And so I'm there to like serve them and the song. And how can we do that? And then usually they go, And then usually they go, actually, I'm being a bit of a dick. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? But
absolutely.
You have to really coax people sometimes.
And I think just the fact that, that these are ego-based things that you're talking about, and just the fact that you are the person that has to bring that to the forefront and to the attention of everyone, is just something that's really uncomfortable to one, to have to do, but two, for them to have to hear that they're doing that sort of thing. And so it's just one of the things that we sometimes have to do. Unfortunately, it's just we just want the best out of this, Yeah,
and that's why I try never to do it in front of the rest of the band, is call someone out on their shitty behavior, because then people get really defensive. Whereas if you take people aside and you say, this isn't working, how can we fix it, basically? Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. And so, when you're, working in these sessions and you're working with these different people and having to navigate different sessions, I guess, what are some of the, go-to, I guess, I hate using the word hacks, but are there any sort of shortcut approaches to being getting the best out of people, or, choosing the right gear, or, setting the right scene, any of these sorts of things that, you have go-to ways of going about, or anything like that?
I don't really know. Someone once told me, a singer once told me, that I was they've done a lot of recording before, and I was the first person who actually went into the booth before them and set it up how I would want it if I was a singer, with water and tissues and all that kind of rubbish. So I think just really paying attention to people's needs is like on a basic human level, not on I'm an audio nerd, let's talk about the microphone I'm going to choose for you level, because they don't care about that. They really just they're singers. They want to feel good singing. You do occasionally get an artist or someone in the band who wants to talk to you about microphones, but it's pretty rare. So I don't know, I guess I just try to preempt people's wants and needs in the studio, and that would be my shortcut for making a happy session.
And it's a great point. And it's your point about people not actually caring about gear as much. There can be audio nerds that love music and love music instruments and gear and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, us as producers and engineers, is about capturing the best performance from that person. And so you're right. It's about providing that environment for them and just, getting them as comfortable as possible, which is what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, I reckon. So,
Yeah. And I think it's it's that thing of if you had to choose on a session between, putting a microphone near an acoustic guitar where it sounds best or where it's best for the player, you have to choose where it's best for the player, because they have to be comfortable. You have to get the best performance. And if you've got a mic near it, then that's good.
Absolutely. And half of us started with some of the shittiest gear that exists, and we've still created something that means something to us and means something to the people that we work with. So that's how I kind of look at it anyway.
And you always get those records. You always get those records that poke through, and they're like, "Oh, it was recorded in a, a fucking shed with no electricity or something." And you're like, "Oh, great, good for them."
Yeah, exactly. Now, another reason why I got you on the podcast was to discuss MPEG, and so. You've started MPEG, obviously, with a few other colleagues, helping you alongside that. But tell us about what prompted you to begin it, and also just what it is.
So MPEG is the Music Producer and Engineers Guild of Australia, or MPEG, as we like to call it for short, or as I often refer to it, the Guild. And when I used to work in the UK, there was a guild, there was the UK MPG. And then when I came back to Australia, there wasn't one. And I always in the back of my mind was like, why don't we have a guild? Someone's going to start a guild soon. We're going to have a guild soon, you know, and it just never happened. And then COVID happened, and there was just such a lack of information about if we could work, what the conditions were around working. Were we included in the musicians thing? Were we a technician? Are we essential? You know, there was just so many questions, and it was literally just a bunch of people asking the question on social media about, can I work? And I thought we really needed some direction or someone to advocate for us. And I was like, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to do it. And no one did it. then my manager, Kath Harrity, she's like pretty, you know, she's one of the AAM, so the Association of Artist Managers people. Was often getting invited to these roundtable discussions in the music industry about what the hell we were going to do, basically. And Dean Ormston from APRA AMCOS both came to me and said, no one's discussing producers. Actually, I think I went to them and said, what the hell? What are we going to do? No one, you know, can you mention us in these meetings that you're going to? And then they came back and they said, actually, would you like to sit at the table and represent producers? And I was like, well, absolutely I would, but I really need to ask some other producers like what their experience is, like what's happening for them, how they're going, what they need and all that. So that's what I did. I started emailing a few guys I knew like around the country, not just people, because I was in Melbourne, which was like hectic, but I was emailing people, you know, in Darwin and Perth and Queensland and asking them what their experiences were. And some of them were much better than others. And I took those answers to me with me to these meetings. And I just basically, if I hadn't been there, producers and engineers would not have been mentioned at all in discussing how the music industry was going to be supported. And so I was just so grateful for that. And I thought when COVID finished, well, you know, it wasn't even when COVID finished. It was just like, I just thought we need a guild. This is the time. Yeah. And so I Googled constitution and I worked out how to set up an organization, and I put some money into it to start it. And here we are. We're over a year later and we've done some really cool things. Yeah.
Well, on behalf of all of the producers and engineers, thank you. I know it hasn't been easy, and I'm a hawk on social media, and I saw. I think it was the first post that you did about it, because I was already following you on socials, and I was just like straight away I was like, finally, I was like, this has needed to happen, because like you said, we're just not represented, we're just not in the conversation. And apart from that, you know, just having an organization like this to be able to have as a not only a social thing, but more formally a way to discuss with other people, like-minded people, people in the business, people that do what we do, is just a great little in-person forum thing to be able to discuss all the stuff that I talk about on this podcast, in an actual multiple people scenario. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it is a lot of work, and that's the only reason why it's difficult. The actual work and the purpose is not hard at all. It's easy. Like it's amazing. It's just a lot of it. And when you're trying to make actual records and be a parent and do all the other things that we have to do in life, it's a lot. But so that's why we started. I set up a board, so there are other members that can advise, and So Kath Harrity was one of the original. She's my manager as a producer, but also she's a producer manager. So she has a lot of experience and has been on many boards before and represented and looked after a lot of organisations. She's the CEO of the Australian Music Centre. And then Tom Larkin, who is also a producer but programs Big Sound these days and is maybe not a producer manager, but an artist manager and has a lot of experience.
Yep.
And then other board members, we've got Eric J. Dabowski, we've got Zylo Aria, who not only is a producer and runs music production for women, she's also a chartered accountant, and we needed a treasurer, and so she was a natural person for that role.
Millie she's been on this podcast.
So Millie Petriella, who spent many, many years at APRA AMCOS, so a membership organisation. I thought that would be a really great person. And so we're just and then, we have Alice Ivy, who's this amazing trailblazing producer as well. So it's such a good team and so many different different angles. Like whenever you bring up issues, there's so many different opinions from different areas of the industry, and it's a really, really good team.
Love it.
But we rely pretty heavily on members to volunteer their time to do like just little things for us, just so that I don't have to do everything myself.
Yep.
And then more recently we conducted the first ever survey of music producers and engineers in Australia.
Yep.
Which because what happened was we were like, well, what do we, there's so many things we could do. What should the guild be doing? And we were like, well, we need to ask the members.
Yeah.
And so we worked together with Magoo, Lachlan Gould, who's obviously like a legendary producer engineer in this country. He's also now an academic, so he helped us to formulate the questions and the actual survey. And then once it was done, he helped us to distill that into like findings. And some of the findings. Yeah. Pretty unreal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've written some key points here. Well, first of all, there was 106 members that responded to the survey. 31% of which state themselves as being underemployed. 16% of which say they work more than 60 hours per week. There's a lack of diversity. 85.8% have identified as male, 11.3% as female, and 1.9% as non-binary. Nobody specifically stated identifying as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And 50% of people work for free at times. So these are some of the kind of negative, maybe negative things that have popped up. Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's pretty eye-opening to see some of these percentages and hoping moving forward that some of this starts to shift purely based on awareness of these facts. And people discussing it and us having conversations like we are now. So, and talk us through kind of some of the conversations that maybe the board's been having or.
So it was funny because, I hope she won't mind me saying, like, when we first got the findings and we all individually read through it, and then we got together for a board meeting, and Annika, so Alice Ivy, said, oh my God, I almost burst into tears when I read some of this, because not only is a lot of it negative, and I didn't expect it to be so negative, but she felt very seen. And I think that's so important that because I think we all have this thing where we love our job so much, and we don't want to say to people that we don't like our job or there are negative things about our job, because we all love it so much. Otherwise we wouldn't do it. That's the long and short of it. But we do sort of struggle in silence a little bit with some of these issues, about not being recognised properly, not being remunerated properly, and not being given the credit that we deserve. And so it sort of felt like for the first time people were like discussing it in public a little bit, and it was okay to do that.
Well,
So
I wrote that other related to credits is that less than 50% of people claim that they're not getting credited correctly, which is I think it was 47%. So that's a crazy number of people that feel like they're getting credited correctly. It's like just ridiculous.
I thought that was Magoo maybe trying to put a positive spin on it, saying 47% feel they're credited correctly, and I was like, hang on, doesn't that mean 53% feel like they're not credited properly?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's a whole thing, but basically now that we have this knowledge, information is power, and now that we have this knowledge, we're able to tailor the response, the Guild's response to what we need to advocate for producers. And so in our strategic plan, it will be based upon the answers from this survey.
And I think a couple of the things that jumped out to me as well, apart from the things that I've already mentioned, which are crazy, but I think the education around how we need to conduct ourselves in general, or the things that we need to pay attention to, such as reporting sick pay and super and, hours and how many, how long we spend in a session, all of these things that tend to go, we take for granted in other jobs because we're allocated these hours, right? In whether you work in retail or something like that, it's like, okay, you're working an 8-hour shift, you get this amount of breaks, you're paid this amount of money, it gets put into your super, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in our jobs, when we're working for ourselves, when we're freelancers, we just don't think about these things unless we actually do, unless we put time aside, once a month or weekly or however.
Because we don't have time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We spend so much time doing the music that we don't we don't put time aside. We don't always run ourselves properly like a business. And I think that's real for a lot of freelancers in general and not just in our industry. Yeah. But if we can start to educate ourselves about best practice, business practices and stuff like that, having upskilling workshops and things like that to teach people how to manage their tax. Like I think it was something like 24% of people are struggling with their tax. Yep. Like even just the things that we can help with, we just need to do it as a community of people. We need to look after each other, and because mental health statistics are pretty dire as well from this survey, there are small things that we can do to help people stay on top of their business obligations, which will ease the burden. Yeah,
and it's something that I've been very mindful of while doing this podcast, is to try and let people talk about those sorts of things when they're on the podcast, if they naturally go towards talking about those sorts of mental health issues, or whether it's money or anything like that. It's important for me to let people talk about that, and for me to bring it up as well, because we have access to a lot of information these days. A lot of it, though, isn't Australia related, and it's also just not our industry related. And so
it's not our industry related.
And so, I've gained a lot of things from international podcasts and, YouTube and stuff like that, where people do talk about, taking the time on, spending time on your business, spending time on setting yourself up correctly and all that sort of stuff. So I've tailored that in my workplace, but I know that if it's not thought about, then it just gets pushed to the side. So it's absolutely important that we do discuss these sorts of things, and like you said, create workshops and stuff like that that can help people get off on a better foot, so that they don't quit music, because that's ultimately what it can lead to.
That is what it leads to, and I have to say that's what it leads to when we want to talk about diversity. That's what it leads to for particularly minorities and people like, slightly diverse of the white, middle-aged white male, which Magoo wrote was the most identified sort of statistic in our group. So yeah, we just have so much work to do within our own community, but so much of it comes down to basic education amongst ourselves, but also like educating people in the industry about who we are and what we bloody do.
Yeah.
Like people don't even know, they do not understand what the difference is between an engineer and a mixer, you know,
Yep.
which to us seems super, super basic, but to a new young A&R that's just joined, you know, a major label or whatever, they don't know. They actually just don't know. And we need to be the ones to educate them so that when they're writing the metadata for these releases, they get the credits right so that then people feel validated, they feel looked after, and mental health statistics go up. You know, it's all related. It's an ecosystem, and we have to educate people about that.
Yeah.
And actually I have just put together some worksheets that are going up on the website soon in the resources section. So we will be circulating them in the industry and amongst ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I mean, I love that this exists. It's as soon as I heard about it, and I've tried to be in every Zoom that you've had, and unfortunately I can't make it tomorrow night. I'm spewing, but I know I'm shattered. But I'm very excited to see. I was very excited as soon as I heard about it. I'm very excited to see how it progresses, and obviously, if there's anything that I can do to help, I will absolutely do it.
Thank you. And it's always great to see your face because we have monthly control room meetings, Zoom meetings, where we catch up and talk about all manner of things. It's always good to see you there and to see the variety of people that turn up. So people like drop in, people are making dinner while they're on it, people are caring for young children while they're on it. It's just about knowing that you're not alone, and we all have shared issues and we can just chat about them, and it's really great. And we are, like you just mentioned, we are having some in-person events coming up. So in Sydney and Melbourne at the moment, but we've already had one in Perth and one in Queensland, but we will be having more just to create this community amongst these amazingly talented people. That was the thing, like the survey did come across quite negative, but some of the really positives for me was like the amount of skill that we all have, the diversity in skills, amazing, and makes me really proud to be part of it actually. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so for people that are hearing about this for the first time, what do they need to do to join up?
Yeah, so at the moment it's free because we're just trying to work out who our people are. So if you go to mpeg.org.au, there's links everywhere on the website to apply to be a member. So the only thing you need to be a member is to have 3 credits on releases, and if you don't quite meet that requirement yet, so if you're a student or an intern, you can sign up as a student or an intern, and all it means is that you don't get voting rights, but you get to hear about all the events, you get all the resources. It's just about making sure that the voting rights are given to the people who actually have done the work.
Yep. Fantastic stuff. We might start to wrap it up. So one of the things that I like to do before we finish up is to ask for your, key bits of advice for people that are maybe young in the game, apart from joining MPEG so that they can get more information. First of all, producers and engineers, and then secondly, for any artists that might be listening.
So advice for people who are coming up? Well, I would say to people who want to get into production or engineering, be the first person to arrive in the morning and the last person to leave, and leave your ego at the door, and do what's best for the song.
Love it.
Always.
Yep.
Yeah. And to any artists, I would say try to have an idea of what you want and try to explain it to a producer the best that you can. And if you don't feel like they're hearing you or understanding you, don't be afraid to say that to them. Don't just go with other people's vision. Like, hold on to your vision and just, stand your ground basically on what you want.
I love it. And the responsibility that we have in that scenario is to be really good with communication, to try and understand the artist and what they're trying to tell us, or, the vision that they're trying to paint for us. But like you said, it is important that the artist has some sort of a ability to, explain in somewhat, production-y terms, I guess. But it's about upskilling. Yeah. It's about a clear communication path so that you can both meet in the middle.
I think something that gets overlooked sometimes is like say an artist is explaining something to you about what they want, and you're going, I know this isn't going to work because of the experience that I have. I know it's not going to work. Don't just shut them down. You need to explain why it's not going to work, because otherwise they just feel like you're not listening. And the other thing you could do is just try their idea, and then it won't work, and then you all move on with your lives. But at least they got to try it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been unreal. I will have all of the links in the show notes, but where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you? How can they reach out to you, or how can they find you online or anything like that?
Well, if you want to just have a little look at some stuff that I've done or whatever, you can go to the website, which is just annalaverty.com. But if you want to reach out to me, my management is Catherine Harrity Management. So they also have websites, and you can find me on all the social medias. Actually, not all of them. You can find me on Instagram. It's pretty much it, and Twitter. Yeah. I think, but I don't use Twitter so much anymore.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Anna, for joining me today. It's been awesome. And thank you to anyone that has checked this out and stayed this long. We appreciate it. It means so much. If you could do us a favor and share this on your social media, in a chat, in a DM, on your stories, wherever you like. It just helps us spread the word to as many people as possible. Make sure you're hitting follow or subscribe on your podcast platform that you're checking this out on, and send us an email if you have any suggestions or questions. The link's in the show notes. It's all available there, and we will see you next time on What's That Sound podcast. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.